I'm variously known as Jane Trigère, or Trigère, as my father would have said, and Hannah, as people in Israel would have called me, or my children call me Ima, and my grandchildren call me Omi. Ima is mother in Hebrew, but Omi is not grandmother in Hebrew, it's in German. And the reason I got the German nickname for grandmother is because Safta was taken, and Baba might have been an option, but my daughter said I wasn't a Baba. So I went with Ken's side of the family, the Germans. He is Opa and I'm Omi, and I think it's very cute. Anyway, back in what I'm going to do here is in several little segments, I'm going to tell you about the family trees. And I'm going to start this segment with the Trigère side of the family, the Trigère and the Korins. That is my father's side of the family. I will do my mother's side of the family. I will do, I can also do the Morrows, and I can do the Bessermans. I've done a lot of research on the Bessermans. And the Bessermans are Kleinmans and Wertmans. But for now, so back in January 18th of 1978, and January 18th actually is my father's birthday. He had 2 birthdays. Because he was born in the Russian Empire, they had a different calendar. So on that calendar, his birthday was January 18th, but on the calendar that we in the West use, he was January, oh my goodness, 5th. I think I got that right. Oh, here I've got January 18th, 5th. Okay. But in 1978, that was a few months before my second daughter, Rachel, was born. And what I was doing was I was doing genealogy. This is the only time I did genealogy, in order to find a good family name for Rachel. So I wrote a letter, and I was married then to Larry Besserman. And I wrote a letter, and it says, "Could you look over the charts enclosed, and with a pen or pencil of a different color, do the following. Make any corrections of spelling or information of names. Add any other names people were known by, nicknames, Hebrew names, official names, etc. Check all birth, death, and marriage dates to see if they are correct. Add the ones that are missing if you can. Indicate the names, or at least the numbers, of any brothers and sisters or children that I have omitted. I will edit all the information I receive from all sources and then send everyone who responds a clean copy of the finished product." The reason I'm doing this is because I was searching the family background for suitable names for a baby coming in late March. Guess what? She came in early April. Thank you for your help and contributions, for your records and memory. Signed, me. So, what I sent out was something similar to this. And it was on legal paper, so I could easily produce it and copy it. And you will notice that there are all sorts of little additions in here. And what's interesting is these additions are not in my name. So let me see. Here's how it was done. This person, Paula, has a red circle around her name. That's what I sent Paula. And then Paula filled it in and sent it back to me. And the reason I did it identifying Paula is because suppose Paula sent me information, and so did Renee, way over here. And Paula sends me information that's related to Renee's family. And Renee sends me information that's related to Paula's family. who am I more likely, and they're not the same information, who am I more likely to believe knows the correct information? That was my thinking. So this is the information I got from Paula, and that is all of her writing that is included here. So that got added to the master sheet, which is bigger, has a lot of white out on it, and was not easily producible on any standard paper. But you'll notice that it's all typewriter. There's no computers in those days. So everything that I'm trying to do is done by rolling around on a typewriter. Okay. And this last compilation, it says that it was compiled in August 81 by me. Meaning, this is already after the fact. I found the name I want, and so you've got one of the originals and the master sheet. So this, what we're looking at here, are Korin's, which is my grandmother's, my father's mother's side of the family. And when we go to the wall where all the pictures are, my grandmother's father's picture is that big oval one that is very central. And here he is. Here he is. His name is Herschel. He's at the top of this list because I do go back a little bit to David Label, and he marries somebody named Rebecca Riva Boyevsky. And he dies at age 84. How I got this information, I don't remember anymore. But he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, of which Herschel seems to be the youngest. If he's not the youngest, he's the only one I have dates for. And he's the one I'm interested in because I'm a descendant of his. Now, he married 2 women. His first wife died in some accident in 1887. I don't have information about that. And, but all his surviving children are from the first marriage, and her name is Paula. Now, if you watch the names, you'll see them crop up again. So Paula, I just mentioned to you a Paula before. Well, that Paula is the granddaughter of this original Paula. And then there's Pauline. That's my Aunt Pauline. So she's given the name from the same grandmother. And then you keep going to the right a little bit, and this Paula's Hebrew name was Payalea. Well, the one I first mentioned is also Payalea. Pauline, I don't know how I got this information, certainly not from Pauline. Her name is Payariva. And the one in France who's born, who did not survive, is also Payalea. So the names keep coming down, and if you follow them down one more generation, for instance in France, you have Paulette, who comes down that way. And then if you look at me, I have also Pauline. And if you look far on the far left here, I think the name disappears. Herschel, his Hebrew name was Tzvi Isaac. He was born in Moliev, or Moyev. I have it spelled M-O-I-L-E-V, but you can be sure there are a lot of, the word was in Russian, and this is a transliteration into Latin characters. And he marries Paula Rosenmann. And their marriage is in 1877. No, that doesn't make sense. Wait a second. Well, clearly there's something wrong here. He's remarried in 1887 to Henya Merlin. Now, I was in touch with the Merlins in Switzerland and Israel for a while. And I think the ones I was in touch with are probably all gone. But Henya Merlin came with some children. She came with, well, for sure she came with Leon. The charts are here, but you'll see I put it in a dotted line to show that's not our genealogical group. That's a married-in group. But they did have a child together. In fact, they had 5. And 4 of them died in childhood. And Tante Marie, whose Hebrew name was Nehama Mara, was somebody that my father used to speak about a lot. So she was this young aunt who was, I think, rather cool, and I think he had a crush on her. So she was this, so if she's born in 1891, and his mother is born in 1880, you can see she's 11 years younger. Have I got that right? Yeah, so she's younger and closer to the child, Silma. Anyway, she has a whole album of hers that I saw at Renee Kaufman's, and that album must be in the possession of Nadine Desmoulins at this point. And we went through the whole album, and some of it is on film, and in my interview with René, where we're speaking French, unfortunately. But it took us a while as we were looking through the album. I said, you know whose album this must be? Otherwise it makes no sense. It's Marie's album, because there were all these people we couldn't figure out, and they were all leaning in this direction. And finally it became clear whose album we were looking at, which is very special. She died in 1917 of a suicide. Now, Herschel's children with Paula are Fanny Vega, Zalman Shlomo, Cecile Tzipa, Gusta Temagitl, and Rose Rachel Dina. So 5 children he had. Fanny stayed in Russia, and she died sometime before World War II of cancer. Now imagine knowing this information. I'm trying to figure out where I got that from. And I can sort of guess, but I've got this, and she married a cousin of hers named Boyevsky. So I told you that there were Boyevskys here at the top. David Label Korin is the father of Herschel, and he's married to Rebecca Riva Boyevsky. So Fanny, Herschel's oldest child, marries a cousin, a Boyevsky cousin. And they have 5 children, and you can see it on the chart. I have no information, and they stayed in Russia. I want to clarify something about spellings. For instance, I mentioned the town of Moliev. Depending if you're a Frenchman, an American, or a Russian, you're going to spell it differently. And if you're a French person, you're going to spell it M-O-I-L-E-V. But I think I've seen it also with a Y in there, Moliev. So don't get stuck on the spellings. And the same thing happens with the family names. So I have at the top of this chart, Korin, K-O-R-I-N. But it's also may have been K-O-R-E-N, which is a more common name. And there's even a publishing house in Jerusalem that's called Korin. But by the time they get to France, they're spelling it, and I think even to America, for the ones who went to America, they're spelling it Corine, which is very French. So that happens to a lot of names. So be aware that you have to be flexible. All right, what I was mentioning before was that the eldest child of Herschel and Paula was Fanny Fega. And I have that she married a Boyevsky cousin, and she had 5 children. I'm going to give you Fanny's children's names. Why? Well, they're good to hear, but also, oh, there's another Paula here. Paula, Avram, Felix, Rebecca, and Slava. I have pictures of Slava and maybe Rebecca or Paula. So when I show you the pictures, when you get to see all the pictures, that's who those people are. The next child of Herschel, or Tzvi Isaac, and Paula is Zalman, also known as Shlomo. He was born in 1881, and he went to the United States in, he died in the United States in 1934. And he married Yeva Perlman in 1900. Now, it's through that branch that the Borensteins show up. They are not blood relatives in any way whatsoever, but it's somehow related to Yeva Perlman. And Zalman's branch is very interesting because they're still in the United States. They've reproduced, and at one point we had contact with them, and then it all disappeared. Zalman got a visit from his sister Cecile, my grandmother. I can't tell you when exactly, but she got to see him and all of his children and some of the babies that were grandchildren. Now Zalman, what does he call his 4 children? One of them is called Paula, after his grandmother. After his mother. And the second one is called Celeste, also known as Slava. The third is a boy called Jacob Reuben, Yankel, Jack. And the last is Ruth. And I got a lot of information from Ruth, but as I showed you before, I got a whole bunch of information from Paula. Paula used to write to me fairly regularly these extremely loving, wonderful letters. Ruth was, she never had children. She was fun-loving and she was light, and I met her twice in my life, and she gave me a lot of information too. And Celeste died around the time I was born. But a lot of pictures I have show Paula and Celeste, who were very close in age, a year apart, together. In fact, at some point you can't even tell them apart. And I have a whole bunch of photographs of that. Jack vaguely looks like he could be my father's cousin, but he's much, much, much shorter. I don't know what happened there. And I got to know him because he worked at Trigère's when I was a kid. He was married to Betty Korin, and they had one daughter, Sandra, who married a guy named Kronik, and she had 4 children, and they're all down here, and I've never seen these people. Celeste had 2 children, one of which I can remember, Roberta Flaxman, and she had 2 children, and Iris had 4 children. Guess what? One of them is called Rachel, and one of them is called Celia. So maybe after, no, it's hard to tell, because of course you've got other families that you're feeding from here too. And Paula, the eldest, had 1 son. I vaguely remember him, and he had 2 children. I know nothing about these people. For those who are interested in doing genealogy, that's probably the easiest group to go looking for, because you're going to find all the stuff in the United States. Now, the third child of Herschel and Paula is my grandmother Cecile, or Tsipa. And she was born in 1880. I don't have a birth city, but I thought it was Kiev or thereabouts. She marries Alexander Trigère, and in 1901. And guess what? In 1902, my father, Syoma, is born. Syoma is a Russian nickname for Shlomo. Shioma, like that. In fact, I've even seen some people, not in the family, but relatives or friends of the family from France, spell it Scioma. They're trying to figure out, because they're not from Russia or they don't know the Russian spelling, but that's how they obviously are hearing somebody in the family saying Shioma. So they're trying to reproduce that shio. He's born in 1902, and his sister is born some 6 years later. And there's a good reason for that. It's because in between time, Alexander goes to France, goes to Paris, and sets up shop there. And Cecile comes a few years later, in 1905. So that means she spent some chunk of time. I don't know when he left for Paris. And they're leaving from, well, my father's born in Odessa, so they're probably leaving from Odessa. And my guess is that Alexander is also coming from Moliev, but I'm not quite sure about that. I have information that will pull it together at some point. My father dies in 1984, and he's married twice, later than everybody else. And if you go across, one of the things I've done is that in a family tree, the people of the same generation are in one line. So if you go across, well, for me, for instance, I'm the youngest of this whole gang in my generation. I mean, there's somebody born in 1928, and I'm born 20 years later. The French cousins are born 1941, 40, 38, 34, 32. Philip and Jean-Pierre, 32 and 35. And I'm in 48, so you can see I'm a much later addition to this crowd. And maybe that's why I'm the one who collects this information. And the same thing happens over here. Not in terms of when they're born, because they're all born between 1902 and 1910. This whole generation of cousins. But if you look at their marriage dates, they're all over the place. 1927, 1932, 1928, and my father, 1947. So he stayed a bachelor a lot longer. And the French cousins of the marriages are in 1931 and 1938. So it's something that you can look at, and it explains sometimes sort of the family dynamics. You know, why do you have no contacts with those people? And here's another interesting thing we're going to look at is, why is there no contact with these American cousins? And all of the orientation was European, directed east toward France, this being east in this case too, toward the French cousins. That's who they grew up with. That's who they were. I'm talking about Syoma and Pauline. They grew up with these people. This was culturally their group. Whether they liked the personalities or not is not the question here. This is the temperature soup or bathwater they're used to. And culturally, these people are like them. These American cousins are not culturally like them. They're not so different, but at first glance, they're very different. Their education is different, for instance. My father would probably be the first to point that out. The French system of education is really different than the American system of education. And he would probably be quite a snob about it too. So Pauline is born in 1908. She's born in France, in Paris. And I have pictures of the place where they lived when she was born. I took a walk there once, and I got into the apartment. I think I've told you the story. I will find an opportunity to tell it in detail. Oh, the question is, are they citizens of France? You know, I don't think they ever, well, Pauline is because she's born there. But the others, I don't think they ever become French citizens. I don't quite know what their status is. I've never investigated that kind of thing. And it would be, all the cousins there were born in France, so they wouldn't have the same problem as my father. But all of their parents, all of that top generation, would have had that problem. So it would be interesting to see, for instance, Cecile and Sioma's naturalization papers. I think I have my father's, or maybe it's Cecile's. Among the papers, I think we have some information, and you could see that. And that's a curious thing too. You could live 30 years in a country and not be naturalized. That's the French for you. Anyway, so Sioma has one child, me, and there's Sarah Cecilia and Rachel Cassia. She's Rachel. The name I found for Rachel was not from this family cluster. It's from the Trigères. And then Pauline's two sons with Lazare Radzinski are Jean-Pierre Alexander and Philippe Daniel. And Philip has a child, Karen, with Melanie Lehman. The next child of Herschel and Paula is Gusta. And I think she shows up in a whole bunch of pictures, but I can't be sure, and no one's completely identified her. But I would be willing to bet some money on some items and say, I think that one is Gusta. I think even one that I have on the wall right up here would be that. Gusta, and her Hebrew name was Tema Gittel. She was born in 1882, and she got to the United States and died here. And Tom Friedman was her husband, and they had one child, and for whatever reason, I don't have any information. So that's a little place you might investigate too. And interestingly enough, I see that both Gusta and Cecile died of cancer. I hadn't noticed that before. And the last of the children of Herschel and Paula is Rose. And Rose is the closest sister to Cecile. They're very tight. They end up as neighbors around the corner from each other, and raising their kids like close cousins. And she's born in 1884. She's 4 years younger than her sister Cecile. I don't know when she got to Paris, but she marries George Wechsler. In France, the name became Wechsler, the way Trigère became Trigère. So here's the flexibility I tell you about names. You know, there are some people who see a big difference between Trigère and Trigère. If you're an American, you say Trigère. If you're a French person, you say Trigère. If you're a Russian, you say Trigère, or something like it. I don't speak Russian. Anyway, they're married in 1904. So Cecile is married in 1901 to Alexander, and Rose is married 3 years later. And I have no idea if they immigrated from Russia together. But George Wechsler was a tailor, a furrier. And Alexander was a men's tailor. And they both belong to an organization, I believe I've got it right. Maybe the Furriers were different from the Taylors, now that I come to think of it. But a Landsmannschaft, a workman's social support group. And in fact, that support group is what took care of burials. And if you see my grandfather's burial spot in Paris, in the public cemetery of Paris, there's a section for different religious groups, and you go to the Jewish section, and you'll see two plots that are like apartment buildings. You go down, and I think you have 6 spots in each one, and those belong to the Taylors. And he's in that, one of them, along with Monsieur Leon Henlein's son, who died in Paris. Okay, so Rose has 3 children, and one of them dies in childbirth or shortly thereafter. There's no information, but she's Payalea. The eldest is Sioma Boris, so we've got Shlomo Baruch, and the youngest is Jeanne Renée. Those are very new names. Those are very French names. She's trying to give her child. I mean, the difference between Sioma Boris and Renée, Jeanne Renée is enormous. It's a cultural leap. So the difference in age is 5 years between them. Sioma becomes a general practitioner, doctor, and Renée becomes a dentist. So Rose got her children into the professions. Sioma Boris marries another doctor. Her name is Renée Lévy-Weissman. And, it says that Sioma Boris was born in Russia in 1905. So there's the answer to our question. So they do not, Georges and Rose do not come to France until after he's born. Jeanne Renée is born in Paris, just like Pauline is born in Paris, but the Siomas, the 2 Sioma cousins, are born in Russia. And this one is 3 years younger than my father. And it says here he died in 1986. I'd lost track of that. They have 4 children. Again, one child dies either in childbirth or soon thereafter, but the same year. And you know these people. I'll get to them in a minute. And Jeanne Renée, known as Renée, has one daughter named Nadine Giselle. Again, very French. So Sioma Boris and his wife Renée, not to be confused with his sister Renée, and in the family culture, Renée, the sister, was always very sweet and very nice. And Renée, the wife, was a little bit of a tough cookie, I think. She had deep sadness to her, Renée Lévy-Weissman. I think she, in all of this family, she's the one who lost family in the Holocaust, whereas this immediate family did not, that I know of. I don't have anything written any place. So Sioma Boris and Renée Lévy-Weissman have Paul Janine. We've got another Jeanne in here, which is kind of interesting, especially since I also have a Jeanne. So, and then you have Jean-Pierre, which is like really funny. You have a whole generation of cousins that have the name Jane or Jean in there. But Paul is for that. Let me see now. It's her. Sioma is naming his first daughter after his grandmother. And she was known as Paulette. She became a doctor also. She died, I think she had a cancer also. She was married to Claude Demey, and they had one son named Florent. And my information here is woefully inadequate because I know he has 4 children, or something like it. And they had, and they had a child that died in a crib death. I remember that. So you've got, in every generation of this family, you have one child that dies. Then you've got Monique Micheline, again, very French names. She's known as Micheline. She becomes a teacher, high school teacher of English. And she's born in 1934. And she marries twice. The first person is Jean-François Legras. And she's divorced from him, but she has 2 children. And they are called Sylvain and Olivier. And they have children. I have no contact with any of these people. The child that died soon after birth is Marcel Bernard. And the next child is Bertrand Serge. And Bertrand you all know, or some of you can remember. And he's born in 1940. That means only 8 years before me. And so he was my closest cousin in age. I remember visiting Paris when I was 11, and he was like 19. And he was probably just finished high school and was now in the beginning of medical school. And I remember him showing me around. And he married, in 1969, Janine Guyot, and they have 2 sons who you may be familiar with, Patrice and Arnaud. And Patrice and Arnaud, I'm missing a whole bunch of information here, which should be easy enough to get. And maybe if I'm sharp, I'll get it for you, but maybe not. You can do it yourselves. And they have, I think, one of them has 2 children, I think. The other one maybe have 3. And then there's another child that's an adopted child. Not legally adopted, but adopted in all the important ways. This was during the German occupation of France, and there was a house, a boarding school, an orphanage or something for Jewish children whose parents had been deported. Goodness knows where these parents were, but they were gone. And Suzanne and her brother were in this orphanage, and who should be the doctor but Sir Mabois? And one day they find out that the Germans are coming, the Nazis are coming, and they made the children disappear into different homes all over the place. They just farmed them out into different homes. And he comes in the evening to take his papers and clean up and make sure that no evidence is left of anything. And who should he see there? I don't know. I mean, if I imagine it like a movie, she's sitting crouching near the front door. But I don't know where she was. Maybe she knew how to get in. Anyway, he found her there, and he said, "What are you doing here, Suzanne?" And she said, "I didn't like the people that I was sent to." Imagine the courage that took. So he took her home. What else was he going to do with her? And she was born in 1929, so she's a little older than all of his children. And in France, later on, she meets an American working for the State Department named Hank Korin. And she's there to help some of these people learn French. And somebody makes sure that they're sitting next to each other at some table. And that was the beginning of a lovely story. And they now live in Washington, D.C., and they have 2 sons and 1 granddaughter. And Hank wasn't going to get placed in Paris because it was too popular a place and he was too junior. So he looked at the State Department to see what countries were not well represented or well studied. And he noticed that the American State Department was not very good on Africa, French Africa. So what he did was to make himself an expert in African things. And he, with Suzanne, was ambassador to several African countries for the United States. And he was actually, if I got this right, when out of Yemen? Oh, Ethiopia, yes. Ethiopia. When the Jews of Ethiopia wanted to leave and go to Israel, a whole bunch of negotiation had to happen for this to move smoothly. And he was back there working his diplomatic magic at the time. So that's a nice story. So I did mention earlier that there was a second wife, Henia Merlin, and she had some children, and these people ended up Jacques, Louis, and she had a son who married somebody, Tekla Dreyfus, and they had 3 sons. And Jacques is the one I was in correspondence with, and I think his children ended up in Israel. And I have some addresses in correspondence. So those are the Korins. Now let me move to, oh, and remember I said to you that Paula is the one who filled out this information as far as she knew in the chart. And so she filled out, of course, her grandchildren, and then her brother's children and grandchildren. So I obviously got some conflicting information. She says that she had several children, and one was named Pauline. Well, from some other source I found out that one was named Paula. But maybe that was a diminutive of Paula. The way Paulette, sometimes there's even references to my Aunt Pauline in France as Paulette, and I understand that she hated that. So now moving to the Trigère side of the family. So here I have another one of these forms. You don't have to come closer because it's hard to read anyway. But this one was sent to Anatole, known as Tola. Anatole Rabinkin. So, Trigère, as I noted earlier, was Trigère. It was spelled T-R-I-G-E-R. It may have been a German name, which is Träger, which means a porter. According to Anatole, or Tola, his grandfather is my grandfather's brother. So their name was Trigère. And he's got some information that he got from Shlomo Trigère on the kibbutz. I've never been able to verify this in any way. He's got the word Trigero, T-R-I-G-I-E-R-O. It means wheat seller in Spain. This information was given by Shlomo Trigère. Really, Trigères were involved in, he says, Trigères were involved in wheat trade in Nikolaev. I checked in Spanish vocabulary, that's correct. It's worth looking at. Anyway, so let's go back to the general picture. I don't have very far back to go here. I have Shlomo and Rachel, or Rachel Trigère. I don't have Rachel's maiden name. I don't know when they were born, when they died, when they married. I don't even have pictures of these people. But they had 4 children. They had Chaya, who married somebody named Kos, last name Kos, and that's all I know. Then I have Jacob, who married and died, and I have no information on who, but for some reason I have the information that he had 6 children. Tova, Boris, Rachel, Aryeh, Chaim, Rivka. The next one is Natan, born in 1878, I've got them in the wrong order here. I've changed it on the main one, right? Once I figured out the right order. So the right order is, the next one is, I have a little information on Jacob's children. Rachel was a nurse in the USSR, and Chaim was an engineer in Krakow. So Alexander is next, and he's born in 1871. His brother Nathan is born 7 years later. Alexander is born in the Ukraine, and Nathan is born in Nikolaev. So Alexander dies in Paris in 1931, and he's married to Tsipa, or Cecile Korin, my grandmother. They have 2 children, and we've done this before. We don't have to do it again, but this is how these people show up on this chart. 4 siblings. I only know much information about 2. And so here's Alexander's progeny. It goes down to Sarah, Cecilia, Rachel, Cassia, and Karen. And on this side, Natan, he marries Chaya Baraniskin. And he has 2 children. And one of them goes to Israel and is one of the early members of Kibbutz Kfar Giladi. And his name is Shlomo, just like his grandfather. Now, you've got 2 cousins. This side is not the Korin page, it's the Trigère page. And so here we are in the cousin page again. My father is 1902. Shlomo Trigère is 1906. Pauline is 1908. Rachel is 1909. So they're in the same bracket approximately. Shlomo and Sioma, Sioma being Shlomo, are both named, the 2 cousins, 2 first cousins are both named Shlomo. Immediately you have to look up, and there it is. They're named after a grandfather. In this cultural grouping, you can probably safely say that when these boys are born, Shlomo, the grandfather, is no longer living. Later on the family tree, the custom is not kept of not naming after a living relative. But here, this is a clue into the death date of Shlomo. By the way, it says that Shlomo Trigère is originally from Hungary. Okay, Shlomo Trigère, the first one up here. Shlomo Trigère, who ends up in Israel, he marries twice. Once Leah Berenberg, and he has 2 children. Tamar, you may all remember, she married Moshe Moron. They never had children. Moshe is the guy who used to ride that little cart around the kibbutz and deliver things and pick up things and whatever, take the laundry. He was sort of the go-to person for getting things someplace. And Yoram was born in 38 and died in 56 as a soldier. They're divorced, and he marries Temi Tzimet. She has 2 children from before, and they have 1 child, Yehudit, who we call Judith, and she's born in 1952. So here's a cousin, finally, who's younger than me. This is the first one. I'm in 48, here's 52. Everybody is 32, 35, 31, 38, okay. And Anatol, okay, and she has 2 children, Tali and Ilan. Now let's go back up. Shlomo Trigère, he has a sister who does not leave Russia. She stays in Nikolaev, and she marries Gesel Rabinkin in 1932. And she's named Rachel for the grandmother. So Natan has named his 2 children after his parents. My guess is both those people were deceased before these children were born. And she has 1 child, Anatol, known as Tola, who marries Natasha Rosenbaum, and they have 2 children, Galia and Dani. Galia and Dani now live in Massachusetts, are married or remarried, and they have children, and I have not followed in their story. So now I have told you the information about, oh, Temi had 2 children from a previous marriage, I said. One was Devora. These are Judith's brother and sister, and so she mentions them often. And Ori. And Ori, we remember from the kibbutz, and Devora lived on another kibbutz. And Ori was married to an American volunteer. And they divorced. They had 2 children, and she went off to Sweden, I think, or someplace like that. And Devora stayed on her kibbutz, I forget what that one is. And so I've just gone through, in as much detail as I know, the Korin and Trigère families. I will do the same with all the other family clusters. Thank you. Bye-bye.